Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here again. This is part of the of what is becoming bi-weekly lunch break Realm Runner meetings, and I am very excited about it. I'm going to start primarily focusing on Europe since this breaks up my day very well. So all the American people can take a back seat until we fix the multitude of issues we have going on over here. Anyway, uh, but I am very excited about my guest today. She is a huge inspiration on me, just for my tastes and this type of stories that I look for. And I was able to get the arc of book two. I started it. It came into my email maybe like 5 days ago. So I'm not fully caught up to speed yet, but I am going to be. But I'm going to bring her to the stage now, the Queen of Grimdark herself, Anna Smith Spark.
Oh, hi. Hi.
How are you doing this afternoon? Or by you, it's night, I suppose.
Yes.
Have a good day otherwise?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a completely insane week because I have had 2 books out this week. So, yeah, it's been a bit mental. And the film I was in was out on Friday as well, last Friday. So it's been kind of slightly insane, the amount of things I've been doing. But, yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant.
Which film was that? It was, I think I saw it, but if you could describe it a little further, because even I need to get a little more familiar with it.
Okay, it's called The Grim and the Dark. It's a sort of documentary about John Blanche and the grimdark aesthetic, and kind of there's this really bizarre conceit where the guy who was Napoleon Dynamite goes around trying to discover what grimdark is and why people are really into it. And I was one of the people interviewed, which was incredibly good. It was really, really exciting. It's a great film. Yeah, it's a gorgeous film. And they came over from America, and they went round a couple of castles, and obviously they kind of were looking at sort of real grimdark in that, sort of medieval history. And then they were talking to me, and they were talking to some people who design miniatures. And then they do end up talking to John Blanche. And my wretched cat managed to get into my interview. My cat photobombed my interview. So I'm there talking really all this stuff about kind of the politics of grimdark and what grimdark means to me, and getting really, really serious. And there's my cat on the edge of the screen doing this ridiculous sort of death stare thing. Right? What are these people doing in my house? What's going on? And he's there for the entire interview. So he's now actually he's now mentioned in the film as well. It's
He was a guest spot. It was a little cameo.
Yes.
It was a catmeo. That's the worst pun I'm ever going to make in my entire life. But I had to, when something like that presents itself, you got to take the initiative.
Yes.
I wanted to, actually, what you were just talking about was almost what I was going to lead into. I'm going to start with book 1 of this ongoing series, because book 2 is coming out very shortly. But one of the things that really drew me into this story, especially reading kind of the blurb, was the Celtic horror background to it. And could you go into that a little bit more in depth, the way you were just talking about the castles and the grimdark, that type of thing? Because I am relatively unfamiliar with that type of lore. So what influenced you to make a story of your own like that?
Oh, it just sort of came out. It was interesting. I didn't think when I started writing that book, I had no real sense of what I was doing at all. It actually, I think the first third of it or so was actually written in a week, which is completely insane, and is basically as it was when I wrote it. It was very, very lightly edited, and it just came absolutely pouring out. That the language, that sort of the kind of slightly heightened, stylized language, the world building, all of it. It was so that kind of language and that kind of folklore is something that I have been interested in my whole life. Remember when I was really little, my dad reading me a lot of Celtic versions of Celtic mythology, sort of the Matter of Britain, which is this sort of, it's like what should be the true secret and true history of Britain, where it's sort of, it begins with Brut the Trojan, who was another Trojan who fled Troy along with Aeneas, who ends up settling Britain, and Britain is named after him. And it sort of takes in a lot of the stories of the Mabinogion and King Arthur, And then I also really loved the Irish sagas, so Cuchulainn and the Cattle Cooley, and that also sort of links into the holidays we used to go on when I was a child. So we never went abroad. We went self-catering holidays in Britain, and we do a lot of walking. So we go to I've been to a lot of standing stones. I've been to a lot of really old churches, walked the landscape. And my dad would talk to me a lot about the mythology and folklore, and he had lots of books about folklore and all these really cool books about sort of weird little local folk traditions. So he grew up in a town called Minehead in Somerset, which is a fun little sort of fishing village on the North Somerset coast on the Bristol Channel, looking out into South Wales. That actually has a hobby horse ritual. So the hodden, the sort of strange monster creature with a horse's skull head in a sword of bronze and ashes, they actually had that is a real thing in Britain. They do, and bits of Europe. They have this hobby horsing tradition, which I think there are a couple of them in North America. I think the very early white settlers brought this idea of hobby horsing over to, I think, a couple of places in North America, possibly Canada. But if you have something like a horse's skull on a pole, the one in Minehead, they have an upturned boat, and then they have a sort of carved wooden head like a horse, like a child's hobby horse. And people dress up. They often wear sort of costumes with lots of ribbons and bells. And you often have sort of big clappers or bells, things, and drums. And you process through the streets with this hobby horse. You could basically go around basically it's a kind of carnival pub crawl. You go around all the pubs, and of course people have drinks in all the pubs, and it's terribly rude not to let people in, and everyone's dancing but it's also these hobby horses are really strange. I mean, horses' skulls are absolutely terrifying. There's one in Wales, the Mary Lwyd, which is a horse's skull on a pole. And if you say to someone who grew up in one of the Welsh towns and villages where they still do this, they'll be like, "Oh, that's like this nightmare thing that everyone thought it was terribly jolly." You go and knock on the door and there'll be this horse's skull.
It's very intimidating for it to be such a fun thing.
Yes, and it's because it's all. I mean, it is kind of weirdly sinister. And there's all these. So some people sort of say, "Oh, these things are all 19th century. They're all Victorian inventions," and then, because other people kind of claim, no, they go right back. These are some kind of pre-Christian fertility tradition or sort of religious ceremony that these beings have got links to. So there's a woman in the Mabinogion, Rhiannon, who has links to horses, and some people could say, oh, she's the goddess Epona, who was a Gaulish, we know was a genuinely Gaulish goddess pre-Christian. And that Rhiannon is equated with Epona, and the hobby horses somehow linked with Rhiannon, and it is going back before the Christian period, which is probably almost certainly not true, but it's so much cooler to pretend it's true. There are, so a lot of that kind of stuff, a lot of these sort of strange folk rituals that, I mean, it's impossible to know, but people do have these sort of arguments that they go right back. So, and obviously, I mean, that's when I was a child, just first reading some of these books. It's just mind blowing how exciting, it just fascinated me. And we'd go to places, and I'd get told these stories about them. And my sort of dad would make sure we had the books if we would go, sort of the local legends if we're going to a place. So it's just something I kind of grew up with, and folk music as well. My mum particularly really likes folk music, so that kind of weirdness of folk music languages again is something I grew up with. So it all just kind of came out, and it is something that absolutely fascinates me. Okay, so I kind of wrote the book. These books are, I suppose, The Making of This World Ruined is me writing what I want. I'm only writing these books because I can't have it for real. So I've been, I go out. I just came back recently from a week's holiday in Dorset. So I was sort of walking on the coast path, the sea and the rocks, and walking these quite wild places. We went to a place called Wareham, which has got it's got 6th century Christian funeral memorials, which have got the people's names. So you have the names of just someone, son of someone who was just living in the 6th century in Wareham in Dorset. And it's just, things like that. And of course, I suppose I never really stopped thinking that some kind of magical quest would happen to me. There's a lot, there's classic British children's fantasy stories like The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, which is about two children and Audley Edge who discover essentially that all the kind of folklore about Audley Edge is all real. Or The Dark is Rising, which uses a lot of, again, of this sort of weird British folk tradition like Herne the Hunter and various stuff about sort of being by the sea. The first book's called Oversea Under Stone. So again, that kind of sense of the magic when you're standing on the coast, right on the edge, there's the sea and the sky and the rock, and that where all the different elements are meeting, and there's magic there, and it's got about the Grail and King Arthur's involved. And I suppose I never stopped longing for that. Like one day, if I stay out on the moors another, just a little longer, if I just walk a little further, one day I'll find all of that. It happens in books to so many children. Why can't it happen to me? So those books, a lot of it is that writing. They were written just after lockdown finished, and I was able to get out kind of for the first time. They were written after the first holiday I went on with my family after when we were able to actually go places again. And they are a kind of expression of, they are what I want to say, what I want to happen to my life. I'm only writing them because until it becomes real. And, one day the opening of A Sword of Bronze and Ashes happens to me, and I get taken through into that world. So that's where they come from. That's why they're written like that. They've got this. That's why I wrote the first third of the first one in a week. Because it was just this absolute, just pent up, just kind of all the desires I have in my life for magic coming out.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was kind of a multitude of things as well, like getting out of the holiday, out of kind of quarantining a little bit, being out almost in it's a literal breath of fresh air. So when that idea hits, it's just like all of it pouring out of you at once. That's crazy to hear how much of that was written in just a week.
It was insane. It was absolutely, look back, and it was just so exciting. So when I started writing The Court of Broken Knives, I started writing, and I'd never written a novel before, and that just came out, and I was writing it every day, and I was writing every day, almost every day for a year. And then that was this incredibly exciting, I'd gone from I really would like to write a book, but I'm too scared to write a book, to oh my God, I'm writing a book. And I know it's a good enough book that someone will want to read it. I kind of could tell when I was writing it. And that was exciting. That was just unbelievably exciting. This kind of magic, whoa, I'm writing a book. I never thought I could write a book, and I'm writing a book. But this week where I wrote about the first third of The Sword of Bronze and Ashes. So everyone else had gone away. My family were away. I was completely on my own, and it was the first time I'd been on my own and able to write after lockdown as well. I was completely, and I was just typing, and I was saying it out loud as I was typing it. It really felt like I was just living in this kind of visionary sense. I was just frantically writing it down, almost kind of, almost like I was drawing, almost like someone was dictating it to me. So it was absolutely astonishing. And then, of course, everyone came back, and then it was like, oh, I can't keep that. And it was exhausting as well. I was absolutely shattered afterwards. But it was trying to write something happier as well. I mean, the books are dark, and I don't know, you said you haven't got very far in A Sword of Golden Ruin, but that is darker. Mm-hmm. But they are still, they've still got a rawness and a darkness to them, like Empires of Dust. But I was consciously, and I felt happier than I felt for years, because it was that kind of amazing lockdown is over, and my entire family have survived. Freedom. And also I wanted to write something. I mean, this book, A Woman and the Sword, which is actually which I wrote immediately after Empires of Dust, which is a kind of sequel to Empires of Dust. So this is me, this Lide, the woman and the Sword, is me, and it is incredibly autobiographical, and it's incredibly bleak, because it's about my feelings about motherhood. And I know you have one child, and you said you had another on the way, which is brilliant. But I mean, it's more complicated than just. I'm sure you have slightly complicated feelings about you love your children to pieces, but on the other hand, sometimes you're like, oh my God, what have I done?
I'll be upstairs.
Yes. And it was quite, so that's a very, Woman of the Sword was really, really autobiographical, with me talking about my worst fears, that I'm not a good mother, and my worst kind of confessing about the all the negative elements about being a mother. And it's about a woman with children trying to survive in the world of Empires of Dust, in this kind of incredibly bleak, incredibly war-torn world in which there's no real sense that things can get better. We're sort of caught in this horrible cycle of violence and war and destruction, and it's a very, very toxic world, and she's trying to manage to bring up her children in this kind of incredibly unpleasant, toxic world, and failing because it's very hard, particularly in that kind of world she's in. So and then I'd had this sort of being away with my family, had this kind of really lovely week, this really idyllic part of the British countryside, and then this incredibly just feeling so happy writing the book, with this book pouring out of me. And Canada was the counterpoint to that. I wanted to write something about myself, about what I'd like to be. I wanted to write something about someone who makes the right choices. I mean, Canada makes the wrong choices quite a lot, but she's trying. She's always wanting to make the right choices. She's trying. She messes up and she moves on. She actually talks quite a lot at one point about how she doesn't think she's particularly good. She doesn't think she's an amazing mother. She doesn't strive to be some kind of amazing ballerina farmer style super mother. She just kind of gets on with her life, and sometimes she really messes up, and that's okay. And I really get that kind of sense of writing something much more positive. And I feel like I felt like I was a better person for writing the book, having written Empires of Dust, which is notoriously bleak.
It doesn't get much bleaker. Which is funny when you say that, and especially compared to the new series that you're writing, because I was, I'm reading that, and I think out of maybe the whole family, it's just Delit as the man in it. It's very female-centric, which was kind of a joy to read, because it's very out of the norm. And it's like you said, where she is trying to be a good mother and makes mistakes, but along the way, she's doing the best with what she has in her environment and the surroundings. And I feel like that was much more of a down to earth and a realistic aspect of things. So it was very nice to read that. And even as she's going off about the good things she does, then it would be, I burp at this, the unopportune time, and listing all of the things. And it's like, that's a real human being. Like, not everything like that is, supposed to be a negative. It's like you see something like that, and it's just like, well, yeah, I do. It made it very easy to connect to the characters in there. So I wanted to ask, what was the biggest challenge you had to kind of all the influences you mentioned, along with like the horror and the folklore, and keeping it, female centric, and being able to have, I'm a 35-year-old guy. Maybe I shouldn't have been able to identify with that character so easily, but you did such an amazing job with her that it was easy. So how'd you go about doing that and threading that line?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I'm really unaware of how I write. I just write. I don't really think about it. I just write. I mean, I suppose the one thing I think about pacing a lot, in the sense of kind of the rhythm. So, but I think about the prose. I guess that maybe that's just where it comes from, because I think about the word. I think about each individual sentence, each individual word, and the paragraph. So the prose is the only thing I really think about when I'm writing. And I guess maybe the characters sort of flow out of that, because I'm thinking so hard about the language. But I don't write consciously, if you see what I mean. I'm just typing away, and it just kind of, I'm not thinking about the characters, they just sort of happen. But I mean, she was kind of, yeah, when she talks about her body, yeah, when she talks about her kind of body, that kind of humanism of kind of sort of, yeah, I belch, therefore I am, that did feel really important, because that's sort of, particularly that kind of frightening world we're living in now, where people just, everything is online, and that you read this quite, you know, you do read this quite frightening stuff. I was reading quite a scary thing about very young girls, sort of 10-year-olds, going into what's it called, Sephora, that big chain of American beauty, expensive American beauty shops. Yeah. And, you know, there'd be 10-year-old girls going in there saying like, oh, I've got these pores, I've got, like, you know, my skin's slightly blotchy, because they've only ever seen people with so many Instagram filters that they don't know what real people look like. And that really kind of horribly curated vision people have of their lives, where you never see reality. And that, so to be kind of talking about kind of, I fart, therefore I am, was quite kind of, it felt kind of important. I mean, it's partly because of Candace's sort of sense of herself. She's incredibly comfortable in herself, and that sort of sense, you know, she's a middle-aged woman, she farts. But yeah, that sort of sense of kind of, her sense of her as being very, physical and quite crude in some ways, because she's not kind of restrained and false. And that humanity, it was kind of, because of course again in Empires of Dust, you know, Marith and Thalia and people, they have this incredibly rarefied, sort of absurdly rarefied existence, and it's this sort of sweeping romance. You know, Marith's absurdly beautiful and Thalia's absurdly beautiful, and they're having this, yes, they do terrible things, but they've also got this absurdly kind of beautiful, incredibly rarefied existence, where it's all beautiful palaces and sort of diamonds and silk gowns, and it's all, and you kind of know it would never have lasted. It would never, you know, because it's all an illusion. It's just this kind of endless illusion of beauty and romance, and everything's totally heightened. And fantasy does that quite a lot, that kind of incredibly sort of rarefied high fantasy beauty, which I really, you know, I really love. But I wanted to have someone who is kind of very rooted in their biological reality as a living being, with all the kind of massive flaws and faults that the human body has, and that she's okay with that. I mean, I like the kind of relationship she has with her husband Delit, where she's very kind of aware that he's a middle-aged man. He was never perhaps stunningly, he was never particularly handsome, and now he's, you know, he's an aging bloke. But they have a real intense commitment to each other. She doesn't look at him the way Marith and Thalia look at each other. She probably hasn't looked too much. She probably never looked at him like that ever. If she did, very briefly. But, you know, they have an actual intense, deep life together. Like that kind of, that sort of, I mean, you know, that's, and that particularly, again, that kind of, I guess that sort of experience that we all went through in COVID, where that sort of sense of what's actually important was something we were all really thinking about. It's weird talking about it as if, because it's like, I expect people to say like, what are you doing talking about COVID? That was 1 million years ago. And actually, well, it wasn't that long. But yeah, so that all of that came out of that, and making her a kind of real, very grounded in her body and herself. And a lot of the kind of really strong people I know do have that kind of, that realness to them, and that kind of awareness of themselves as mortal beings. And of course, the kind of weird jokes, spoiler, is Kanda is not a mortal being, but she's kind of, but she's very kind of rooted in her body. So in fact, this book, Anderson versus Death, which is a really completely random Judge Dredd novel I wrote, there's a lot of stuff in that. So Judge Death is dead. His big thing is, there's this famous line, the crime is life, the sentence is death. So he's got this kind of, he's taking the kind of fascist ideology of a police state in which everything is completely controlled and there is no crime and everyone is completely obedient to its limit, which is the only way you can actually achieve that, is to kill everybody. Because only in a world where everyone is dead can you actually have a completely purified, perfect, ordered, crime-free world. And then he's confronted with Anderson, who's this sort of very kind of tough but also incredibly tender-hearted, tough young woman with a massive gun. And again, she kind of talks to him about, he's dead, so he can't, if he's dead, he can't burp, he can't fart, he can't kind of, and that's actually, that's one of the big things about being dead, is he's kind of, he's still walking around, he's alive in inverted commas, in the sense he can talk, he can see, he can kill people, but his body is not a living body. And actually what he can't do is the kind of, he's pure. He can't do all that kind of dirty things like belch and fart, and he doesn't need to shit, and she actually sort of, and that again became something that I talked about a lot in that book, about her being kind of like, the difference between the two of them is that she has, she has a body, a failing body, and he is dead, so therefore he's completely sterile. So that kind of felt quite politically important as well, that kind of notion of what the kind of sterility of the body versus the kind of completely chaotic, you can't define it, it just kind of does its stuff kind of chaotic body.
I'm popping up the cover here because that was a very welcome surprise. I know this is coming out or came out right around the same time, but how did you get involved with that IP? Because that, when I saw you post that and it was like, I'm writing a Judge Dredd, I was like, what? Like, where? How did my wires just get crossed like this? Was that something that you were always interested in, or did one of the creators of that, or someone working behind the scenes over there, reach out to you?
Oh, I begged to do it. I sort of was talking to someone who was talking to the commissioning editor, not kind of just because as a friend, and I actually begged to do it because it's a childhood thing. It's a massive childhood thing of mine. Something I kind of loved when I was a child. Older boy down the road who we went to school with every day, he was really, really into Judge Dredd. And so I was really, really little, and I'd see his school bag with all, he'd draw these fantastic sort of painted Tipex, the sort of the 2000 AD logo and the Dredd logo and things all over his bag. So, and so when I was a child, Death and Anderson were two of my favorite characters. So it just felt like, I kind of begged to do it, and then suddenly I was like, oh my god, this is a book with sort of guns and motorbikes, and it's set in the future, and it's so completely outside my comfort zone. But at the same time, it was like, this is the book I was born to write. It's about Judge Death. It's about someone who's like, it's the Dark Judges I remember them so vividly from when I was a child. They did have a massive influence on me. And you kind of, if you think about some of the way that some of the things that happen in Purse of Dust, and some of the way that people like Marith sees the world, there's obviously some kind of little line there. And it was sort of also just the kind of sense of having my name and 2000 AD. It's just, that was 2000 AD was something I just kind of, it was one of those things I remember thinking, my God, how cool would it be to write for this? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't write for many IPs, but this one just felt kind of, it felt like, it's like a sort of childhood, it is like a childhood fantasy completely fulfilled. It's amazing. That was one of the few stories I think I'd write in that world, and it's just perfect. It was my two favourite characters. And I got, because of what the setup is, I got to go really into Judge Death and Judge Mortis, and go really into that kind of totally non-human, really frightening, horrifying alien perspective on life, the universe, and everything, and get really into Judge Mortis's thought processes, and which I really, really enjoyed doing it. Sort of kind of felt like so if anyone's read this book, In the Shadow They're Dying, so some of the Inanna stuff in that, the demon in that, it felt like a fairly kind of natural progression in some ways to, to write Judge Death and Judge Mortis. And then Anderson is just, she's quite like Candace. She's a really, really lovely, you'd want to be her. You'd want to be her friend. If one of your children as an adult brought her home and said, I think this is the one, you'd be like, yeah, that's definitely the one. And so, yeah, I just kind of, it was just really, really lovely to write like her and it was completely it was completely mad. It was completely so off brand in some ways, but in the other ways, people keep all these jokes, of course, about like Judge Death. I do manage to get that in at some point. Someone said we get some kind of death line.
So it got squeezed in. That's perfect. I'm going to mention In the Shadow They're Dying in a second, but I also wanted to ask, because I think one of the coolest things, especially coming from, I guess, an original into IP standpoint, especially, working on, such dark stuff and horror elements that you have. And I guess you almost kind of mentioned it, where there weren't a lot of other IPs that you would work on. But do you think that it's a pretty cool correlation between people who write such original stories where it has like horror themed elements and then getting brought into bigger stories? Like, have you seen the movie Weapons that just came out?
No.
It's like very, very good. Probably one of my favorites of the year so far. But the author of that started he was a sketch comedian. And he wrote 2 movies beforehand. One of them was, again, a comedy that everyone else thinks is horrible. It was pretty funny. And then there was another movie called Barbarian he did. But he did these 2 fully independent movies that ended up being in bidding wars. And he wrote, directed everything himself. And now he's tapped to do the next Resident Evil movie, which, again, huge IP. And it's cool to see people write original things and then get brought back into stuff that they love. Like you said, that was something that you identified with since your childhood. But what other IP, like things from your childhood like that, where it has left a lasting impression on you and, kind of influenced the way that you work? Like the way you said this, jumping into this, it was like fit in perfectly. What else from your childhood do you think would you be interested in working on?
Probably actually very little. Sorry, that's a really rubbish. You've asked this a pretty cool question, really long question.
It's definitely the right answer.
Yeah, it's probably very little. So, I mean, the 2000 AD, there was that space because it was so chaotic. So the early comics, particularly, they didn't have the kind of the sort of the manual, the Bible for the world, the way that modern IPs do. It was just people writing stories kind of on the hoof. So, there's no geography for Mega City 1. There's sort of, people point out there's one episode where there's a particular area of the city that's mentioned by name, and it's in that story it's got docks because they were writing a kind of noir story and they wanted the whole kind of by the docks, and there's ships and there's people running away and there's water and kind of the sort of New York noir sort of thing. And then for some reason they use the same name for a different area that's like 10 miles inland, and some of the people who live there have never ever seen the sea. Because they just kept the same name for some reason. And I mean, it's totally unmappable. There's lots of it. It's almost, there's lots and lots of, most episodes involve characters who appear and die or just disappear again. So there's Judge Dredd. There's a couple of characters like Dredd who are obviously recurring characters. But most of the other characters are just those kind of, they pop up and then they're never there again because they're just there for the story. And there's no real coherence at all. It's only later that the kind of complicated backstory for Dredd and the sense of there's a kind of wider narrative here. Originally, it's just this bloke going around fighting crime in this city with nothing more than that to go on. And in fact, apparently the original story that Judge Death and Judge Anderson appear in was just a little throwaway one-off. It wasn't supposed to go anywhere, which is just mind-blowing that someone just created those two characters just as a kind of little standalone story. And it's just like,
yeah, it was almost like, oh, what a waste this would have been.
yes, but just the idea that someone can be that titanically amazingly talented, that they're just like, oh, we just need a week's filler, and they create Death and Anderson. It's just ridiculous. But so that freedom to kind of not feel like people are being like, oh, but that's not strictly right, you know, that's if you go to look at, you know, page 300 of the world building manual, that's not right. I wouldn't have felt comfortable trying to write in something that's very, very structured like that, because I needed that sense of freedom. And it's that kind of, I mean, it's ridiculous. So even when I don't do world building before I'm writing, I kind of, obviously book 2 and 3 I then need to keep to the world building I've done in book 1, but I need to kind of remember how the world works, but I don't do elaborate world building. And even in The Shadow of Their Dying, even though it was co-written, neither me or Fletcher did any world building before we wrote it, or indeed basically while we were writing it. We would just kind of, Fletcher would introduce something, so I'd be like, okay, right, let's just go with that. And he's just put some random thing in, so I will just go with it and expand it, and probably he just meant it as some random thing, and now it's like a massive plot device. But and that's always how I've worked. So it would be very hard to work in many IPs. I mean, there's kind of if someone would offer me something like, you know, an interesting new project where it's like, you can develop some of this your way, that would be really exciting. And in fact, so I'm really influenced by visual things. Actually, when people often ask me who are my biggest influences as a writer, actually, all kind of people want me to talk about things like, you know, the big battles, you know, what things have influenced me, when I sort of write my battle scenes, what influences me on things. I actually always end up talking about films, because film is what I see it, and I'm trying to write what I see, and what this all kind of, and what I hear and what I feel. So that experience of, you know, I've talked about the Battle of Helm's Deep in I think every interview I've ever given, but that experience about the Battle of Helm's Deep, when, you know, it's the sound and the lighting and everything, and the way the camera work and everything about that, and I'm trying to replicate that on the page somehow. So, and actually when I was a child, I would tell stories based on pictures from books. So all the kind of lovely, I had this beautiful children's version of the Mabinogi on these ancient Welsh legends that I've drawn a lot in Bronze and Ashes and Golden Ruin. And I told myself stories based on the beautiful sort of Celtic style pictures of the characters. So, and sometimes I'd need to buy a book. So I had the picture. I would be begging my parents to buy me a particular book, not because or a toy, not because I wanted it, but because I needed to have it to tell the stories about the picture. So yeah, if someone kind of someone sort of said, you know, these are the image, you know, these are stills from the film, or these are stills from the video game, or this is conceptual art for the you know, the, like some of the, like, I mean, I talked about earlier about being the film about Warhammer and 40k, you know, so one of the film companies, one of the gaming companies that was also in that film, do this really cool game called Doom 1492, Doom something or other, which is medieval trench warfare. And, you know, if someone showed me, like, here's some really cool photos of the art for these minifigures, or here's, you know, film stills or gaming stills or something, write a story which culminates in this battle or something, that's the kind of thing I'd love to do, I guess, because it would have that sort of, okay, I've got this amazing image, and I've got to somehow put it into words and describe everything that's going on here, and describe how I think it sounds as well, and how I think it smells, and just that sense of a really, really immersive piece of art. So I really would, that would be something I would be really, really interested in. And I'm kind of, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of, because that would be, but I need to have that kind of freedom of, like, you know, you're not going to tell me that character kind of only has these movement rules, so they can't do this thing, or kind of, but yeah, But
it's very interesting that that's that's kind of what you aspire to write, because I always heard before I started your works that your prose was top of the line and it doesn't get better. I know you mentioned it earlier, and it is a fact. I got nudged into dropping other things and starting to read by ZB Steele. And I think within the first 3 or 4 pages, I was sending him sentences, and I was just like, why can I see this? Like, the way that you write is, I was talking to my sister-in-law the other day because she's actually on the chat commenting as well, but I was telling her, I was saying the way that you write is lyrical. I'm a big music fan, a big movie fan, everything like that. And the way that the way people say that they're great writers, and it's like, yeah, like the paragraph comes together. I feel like every word that you use is intentional, and it comes out across that way with ease, almost. Like the way you're reading it is it transcends kind of like your mind, where you can close it and see what's going on. So, just hearing you say that, if I got a picture, I could write it, and I want to kind of get across like what you could see and hear and smell. That's, I would say, the best example of an author is you at that, because it feels like you're in the story as it's happening. And maybe that's why the book comes across, a couple of the stories come across so grim. And it's funny because in the shadow of their dying, you worked with Michael Fletcher, who is another one of my favorite authors. Everything I read by him is one of those where it's just like, fuck, here we go again. It was actually going to be like one of my, like when I was first starting this, a recurring theme was, would you survive in the book? Because me and my brother were reading Beyond Redemption, and I would die everywhere. Like, there is not a safe space in any way, shape, or form. I told him, I was like, there are dragons dropping horses out of the sky, killing people. And it's like, you just don't have a chance. But in that story, the way that you two work together, it brought some of the darkest themes and writing that I've come across, and you guys both do such a good job of making it fun to read. So
that book was just that was just insane. That was just, I mean, we were just trolling each other. And actually, I mean, it was commissioned by, so obviously, Adrian Collins at Grimdark magazine commissioned it because he really wanted to see the two of us write together. And apparently people have been saying for ages they wanted to see the two of us, what would happen if the two of us wrote something. I'm sure there was just something at one point where someone had this thing where they thought that we were actually the same person writing under 2 different names or something completely insane.
Just 10 names.
But we just, I've sort of chatted to him. I'd love to meet him in person. I've never met him in person, but we just clicked. We obviously just have thinking the same way. But we were both, so Adrian was like, okay, write a thing. And it's like, okay, this is going to be a thing published by Grimdark magazine by the two of us. There's no sense in the world that we need to write this in the kind of way that, this book might be picked up by someone who's never read a fantasy novel before, or someone who's, they haven't read a fantasy novel since they read David Gemmell 20 years ago, but, this will be the first. There was no sense of that. There was like, okay, this is Grimdark magazine commissioning the two of us to write something for Grimdark magazine's readers. So we can just go for it. We don't need to worry about, and again, there's that freedom of, okay, we don't need to worry much about world building, because most of the people reading this thing, they're probably not going to want some kind of introduction to this is how a medieval tavern scene works, because they know how a medieval tavern scene works. So we shall just go with the bat they know, and they know what the whole setup is, and we'll just go with that. And we were just, we were virtually like, it was like a game. We wrote it kind of like a game of consequences. We were almost like, let's see you get out of this one. You've really got out of that one. That's kind of, okay, let's see how further we can go. Right? Well, it was like, I will raise you an undead octopus. Well, I will raise you. And Adrian actually was a bit like, look, guys, you need to tone it down a bit. Too dark, too grim dark. But it was just, that was just insane. I think Adrian was actually, we were all surprised by how well it was received. It's been shortlisted for a World Fantasy Award, and I think I can say absolutely with certainty that it is the first grimdark comedy horror novella with the entire page that I wrote, which is entirely a joke about female ejaculation, which has been or ever will be nominated for a World Fantasy Award.
Yeah, that's going to be a permanent record for you, I think. That's not going to end up being touched. And that's crazy, because I was going to ask how that collaboration happened. So that was like fascinating backstory on it. And just hearing I know you guys each had the different characters, but just writing yourselves into, now let's see that. Like the one-upping and showmanship that was like the backstory I wanted to hear, because that is.
I think crazy. we were both just like, okay, let's just haha, like let's just see who can win here in a battle of who can be even darker and more disgusting. And it was I don't think I'd ever. It just completely broke all of us, and it broke Adrian as well, because he was like, at one point our editor was like, do you guys even read like the previous chapter the other one has written before you write your next chapter, let alone reread your own stuff to check kind of continuity? Like, someone walks into a pub and says, oh, I'm starving, let's have lunch, and the next minute someone's like, oh, like, God, it's time to go to bed, I'm knackered, it's the middle of the night. Like, what have you got any kind of sense of like anything about continuity and timeline? And we're like, no,
it worked though. Which it did. That's really crazy to hear. Are you would you collaborate with not just him, but I guess if you had to pick another person to work together with?
Honestly, I probably wouldn't. There was a kind of special kind of magic in that book, but I think I probably wouldn't do it with there are very few people apart from Mike Fletcher that I think I would be happy to write with, because we just kind of we just, as I said, we just sort of, I don't know, we've just always got on, and we just always seem to see the world in the same way and be able to think in the same way. But I think I'd be too much of a control freak around a lot of other people. I love the way he writes, I love the way he thinks, I love his characters. So I'd kind of, other people I'd be like, no, what are you doing? It's not right. So
the bar's kind of been set. Like,
I'm sorry, that's to be terribly honest, but it's kind of.
It doesn't get better than that. So if you have to tap out, it's on a high note like that. I have a couple of fan questions here. I know one person's in the chat who was very curious about your most expensive pair of shoes.
Okay, I may have been prepped for this question in advance, because I have my most expensive pair. Well, one of them here. Da-da! This baby. Holy shit! Yeah. So So this was custom made for me. I mean, you'll notice that actually for me it has a very sensible heel. It was custom made for me when I was invited to be a guest at the books part of Gen Con, the massive gaming convention. So they have a little little fantasy and science fiction book festival attached to the gaming convention. And I was told it's in Indianapolis. It takes place in what was told is the biggest convention center in the United States of America, which means it's probably bigger than some small countries.
Yeah.
I mean, it is mind-blowingly big. Have you been?
I have not.
It's just incredible. I mean, they're just halls the size of airport hangars, just full of people gaming. So I flew I flew transatlantic. And I think I flew into Detroit, and there were, even on the plane I was getting to Detroit, there were obviously some people, and I'm looking at them like, okay, you're probably going to Gen Con. But we got on a smaller plane from Detroit to Indianapolis. Every single person on the plane was going to Gen Con. Mm-hmm. Every single person, everyone was there. There were people there with their dice boxes or their cards or their figures, and everyone was wearing really, and then when we were being driven the next morning to the venue, and the streets, it was like a massive football match or something. Mm-hmm. But gamers, it was just our people, just in the tens of thousands.
Yeah, it turns
converging on.
into a small city, those things.
It was unbelievable. So I was told I could not wear uncomfortable shoes because this thing is the size of a city. So I got these custom made, and they were they were made by a woman in America who I found on Etsy. And then obviously they then had to be shipped over to the UK, and they're really heavy. So they were really expensive. Then the postage was really expensive. And then what I hadn't figured is, of course, because they were so expensive, I then had to pay massive import tax on them. So they were then held in Heathrow somewhere in a warehouse until I'd paid like about £100 to get them out of. So these cost me the most insane amount of money. But being a guest at, I mean, it was, it's a massive honour to be invited to be a guest at something like that. Was just amazing. And it was one of the best book conventions I've ever done. It was quite a small event, but it felt like all the panels I was on felt like the most fantastic university seminar almost. We were having these really, really in-depth, really interesting conversations about, like, it was a really good panel I did with Bradley P. Belia about maps and world building and the kind of geography of your world. And it was so exciting. And then, we were just in this massive venue full of gamers and just doing, I remember walking down a corridor and I just turned around a corner and there was a band of people. They were made up as they were all wearing full prosthetics as Klingons.
Wow.
And they were singing, and and there was one Star Trek officer, one sort of human in a Star Trek jet sweater, and all the rest were done as Klingon warriors, and they were singing to a professional standard medieval Persian love poetry. Wow. And in between these amazingly beautiful, haunting medieval folk songs that they were singing, performing with, proper instrumentation, seems beautiful. They were talking to the crowd in Klingon, and it was just like the most amazing. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, you're not going to find that anywhere else.
No, it was So these shoes, just I don't wear them that often because they are they're actually incredibly comfortable, but I'm terrified of damaging them.
Yeah, that's wear those for that, and then enjoy the shelf.
Yes.
One of the other questions that I got, which I think is very interesting and it can be very helpful. What advice would you give to someone looking to break into the grimdark scene, especially a female?
Oh goodness! So I was actually giving someone advice on this on the Reddit Grimdark and Epic Fantasy site the other day. So
too.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm not on Reddit very often because I've got so much going on, but that seems to be a really cool subreddit. Get on things like that subreddit. Get on. Unfortunately, the Grimdark Fantasy group isn't quite what it was. It used to be much more dynamic. It's almost got too big. But build some kind of network. So you have friends and supporters who are sort of supporting your work and enjoying your work. And because you do just need that network of people around you, not just to kind of keep you going, I guess. I mean, that sort of sense of like being in a writer's group where someone's sort of saying like, oh God, I've got so many edits. And that just does give you that kind of sense of, I want to be in that position. I want to be saying, I've got so many edits. So it gives you that kind of impetus to keep going. The really lonely thing about writing is really lonely. And you do just get this kind of despairing sense of I'm at home writing, and then, how am I ever going to get anyone to notice my book? But having that community of people who are just kind of like, I'm at home writing as well, and sort of just talking about writing and supporting each other. I mean, that's having that kind of network. So if people are in, I'm a member of the British Fantasy Society, and then lots of people kind of say, well, I don't live in Britain. So, but we are quite international. But we do take internet. We are international. We have people from all over the world. I guess a kind of vague interest in British fantasy probably kind of helps. But we're there kind of, and a lot of it is about people writing and supporting each other. So they have a Discord group, and I think they do writing sprints on they have some slightly weird thing where they do writing sprints, I think over Teams, where they're all log into Teams. and say hi, and then or Zoom, and then they'll log out again and write. I have this right, and then they need to log in again in an hour's time, and people will talk about how far they've got. So obviously, if you're like, well, I just kind of went off and reread last week's TV guide, people are like, someone else is going, oh,
numbers ain't
so that kind of thing. They have Discord groups and things, and I think again they do kind of writing sprints on Discord, things like that. There's sort of communities, and people just, I know people just end up setting them up, those kind of groups up themselves virtually. That lots of people, most people I know have some kind of little WhatsApp or Discord or Facebook Messenger group or something where people are a bit just like kind of, how's it going? And I mean, I guess the other thing is not, you know, people sort of talk, obviously everyone has this dream about getting an amazing agent and getting a massive book deal, and it's easy for me to say because I got an amazing agent and I got a massive book deal, but then I stopped getting massive book deals and I now have much smaller book deals, so no. It's not, which I'm kind of really fine with, because I love my publisher and I love what I'm doing, and I know it's not the kind of stuff that gets massive commercial book deals, but anyway, I digress. But yeah, but you know, you put something on Wattpad, you know, just stick it up completely unformatted on Wattpad, someone will come back to you and say, I love this. Self-publishing, I'm in awe of, you know, friends who self-publish, because the amount of work they do with the covers, and actually most of the self-published authors I know seem a lot happier than everyone, apart from the kind of J.R. Abercrombies and J.R.R. Martins of this world, because you're not in a constant state of nervous terror about being dropped. You have control. You don't discover you've got the world's worst cover at the last minute. You know, there's that. If you know, self-publishing is, there is nothing, you know, it's a wonderful thing. The fact is that publishing has been democratized to the point people can put out books and make them available, and people can read them without the need for the huge publishing apparatus, is an absolutely amazing, wonderful thing. And yeah, lots of self-published books are crap, but then lots of traditionally published books are crap, frankly. But you know, if you put your book, if you self-publish it, or you just put it on Wattpad or whatever, someone will come to you and say that they love your book, and will reach out to you and say that they really, really love it. And that's all you can hope for. That's, you know, that's all I can ever hope for. That's what anyone can ever hope for. And anyone who's writing just for the money, in fact, anyone who's like, well, I only want some kind of massive international book deal so I can make my fortune, that's not the right reason to be writing. But yeah, just kind of build a community and try and just reach out and make some friends. I mean, you know, people reach out to me and say, could I have a look at, you know, would I be happy to blurb their book? And I do sometimes say yes, and I really enjoyed their books. Sometimes I have to say no because I couldn't possibly read that many books. But it's kind of, you know, I feel like the friends I've made in this community are really, really important to me. I don't actually have many friends in this community. It's really good. But you know, I kind of most of my friends are people I've met, and some people I have never met in the flesh, and probably never will. And go to conventions if you can. Again, just have that kind of, meet people, hang out with people a bit. But if you can't, then the internet and social media have many, many appalling downsides. But the fact you can be in a Discord group with the other people who are and just talking about writing, it doesn't even need to be the same genre. But, you know, just talking about, I smashed it today. I wrote 2,000 words and I completely solved this plot issue that's been really bugging me. You know, that's a really, really brilliant support thing to have. And yeah.
A very good in-depth answer, especially, you know, for people on the fence. That I've seen like some of the sprint groups work, and I joined one or two of them just in passing, and it's like very inspirational to see how supportive everyone is of each other. My last question for the moment, because this hour went way too quick.
Yes.
I feel like this could be like an every other week thing. But my last question for the moment, I ask it to a lot of people, but you especially I'm curious about, because I'm going to say it again. Best prose I've ever read. It's bar none. It's almost a permanent number one. Unless you start writing single words as sentences that would topple you from the top of the list, I can't imagine it happening. I'm always curious about this as a very uncreative person so far. But when you write something, whether it's a line or a paragraph, anything at all, do you realize while you're writing it that is really fucking good? Or does it take a reread for you to realize it, or someone else in your life, whether it's like a beta reader or just a editor, to go, you nailed that? Or do you finish typing the sentence and just go, did it? Like, that is perfect.
I do sometimes think that, yeah, that's it. That's so. I mean, writing is a really painful process for me because, yeah, every word does have to be perfect, and I will sit there. I will start messing around if I have something like and the. I will start messing around with, do I have a comma? Do I have a comma here? Do I take the comma out? Should it be a semicolon? And I will drive myself insane with things like that. And it's like, I'll be like, do I have a paragraph break here? Do I have a line break here? I will drive myself insane. I will go back and back and back. And I edit so much as I go along. I delete so much as I go along. And I'm just tearing my hair out at times. I do feel like when I'm writing, it's like drawing a still life. I'm like trying to capture in photorealism something I can see.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of, it's just not working, it's just not right, I cannot get this right, and it just breaks me. But then when I get it right, I do know, I'm like, okay, that's it, that sentence is as it stands, or that paragraph is, that's it, and I can move on. So it's really exhausting, but yeah, there is an exhilarating moment where I'm like, okay, I know that is a good paragraph, I know that has worked, and I'm really pleased with that. And then, of course, then it's like, oh God, then I've got to do the next paragraph, and it's got to be like that as well. It's kind of, I was having a conversation with Adrian Tchaikovsky because he was saying, oh, he finds writing really enjoyable. He finds it incredibly relaxing. And I'm like, it's not relaxing. It's like, I mean, for me, it's like this is when it's going really fast. Actually, have you seen David Lynch's Dune?
Yes.
I presume yeah. You know the bit with Pacer what's his name, the Mentat, the Harkonnen Mentat, and the bit where he's taken all the drug and he's talking faster and faster and faster. He says, I'm a Mentat, I'm a human computer, and his brain is just going faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. That is me when I'm writing. I identify with that so much. It's like I'm one of those people who really enjoy doing exams. I really enjoyed finals exams because I'd be sitting there like, oh my God, like, fuck, oh my God. And then my brain would be going faster and faster and faster. But like, yeah, this is being alive. And my brain is just going faster and faster and faster writing this essay. And writing is like that for me. It's like, this is the most painful. Or it's like, I quite like doing really high impact aerobics, really like intensity, high impact workouts. Because again, it's like, this is killing me. This is the most painful thing I've ever done, but I feel so alive. And it is like, yeah, it's like I'm in some kind of titanic death struggle with every single damn word. And sometimes, occasionally, I'm like, yes, but yeah, it is this kind of manic process where I'm running around the house. I'm like, yeah, I'm getting up. Yeah, it is absolutely exhausting. But when it's good, I do feel like, yeah, that was worth it. That's worth it. It's just
it all comes full circle. This is the first time I've heard of writing being a full body workout.
It really is like, oh God. And yeah, I sit and I swear and I'm like tearing my hair and I'm banging the table. It's a full body thing. Yeah.
That is interesting. That's so cool because I just like putting it all together. Like, yeah, I've always wondered that because sometimes you read things and it's like, was that tweaked a little bit, or did that just come out and get that stamp of approval? So it's very interesting to hear, especially someone of your pedigree actually have that in-depth answer to it. So I appreciate that. Like I said, this was the fastest hour I've ever done ever. I feel like I'm really bummed, and I feel like this is gonna have to be like a bi-weekly thing. We'll just start doing this again. Maybe I'll hand the reins off to you, and this is my new co-host, Anna Smith Spark, everyone. But thank you very much for joining me today. This was it was definitely exactly what I needed in the middle of the week heading into the weekend with it. These books were exactly what I needed right now. Like we said, you know, my wife's pregnant, getting ready for baby number 2. This very female-centric storyline. It was very nice to read and see someone, you know, as strong as what I see in real life with a lot of the women that, you know, I am very close to. So it was a very nice parallel where I'm reading it and living it. And I think you did an amazing job with it so far, and I'm sure it's just going to stay just as good. So I just wanted to say thank you again for joining me and writing these amazing books.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, no, I'd love to come back. I love chatting to people about books. It's just, yeah, it's brilliant.
I'm setting next time for 2 hours because this was a tease. I'm not doing this again. But yes, everyone in the chat, everyone who's going to be watching this, go pick up book 2. I think it comes out in like 2.5 weeks, maybe.
So in the UK, it's already out.
Okay.
But yeah, so I don't know about the rest of the world, but yeah, in the UK, it's already out. So yeah.
So go buy it now. Stop watching us. Go buy it. But yeah, thank you again. Thank you for everyone in the chat for joining us, and have a good rest of your night.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.